NATO exercises without the USA. Now it's every man for himself. Russia is preparing for a new war, and Poland has announced a call for military service. The EU is rearming to conduct modern warfare. The USA has disabled its F-16s. A new package of sanctions from the USA will affect Russia's energy sector. You can catch these and other news in the new episode of Hotspot. The USA is leaving NATO. The end of the coalition. Everyone is on their own. Europe is left alone. The exercises of the North Atlantic Alliance will take place without the participation of the United States. This and more.
Donald Trump waved goodbye to NATO from the USA. Look, to inform their allies in the North Atlantic Alliance that they intend to cease their participation in battle planning. Already in this episode, verdict means that Europe is facing a predicament. NATO European countries will have to plan exercises without the Americans or with only small units of US troops participating.
The United States may reconsider its attitude towards NATO and, so to speak, change its position on NATO.
Thus, analysts explain that frugal Trump is trying to cut US military spending in Europe, thereby forcing alliance countries to rely more on their own military capabilities rather than on the unconditional protection from the United States.
We can't rule out that this is, in general, an element of blackmail, an element of pressure on countries if the alliance is really serious, and if we take a closer look, then contributions to the collective defense capabilities from various NATO member states, they are different. And so that ceiling that exists, or rather the goal that has been set today, is 2% of the gross national product. Not all NATO member states have reached this goal.
In total, there are about 160,000 American servicemen stationed outside the United States today. In theory, Trump could redistribute them in such a way as to focus on NATO countries that have increased their defense spending, leaving those who haven't spent on defense defenseless. If NATO countries do not take the statements of the American president too seriously, experts assure that he might even withdraw from the North Atlantic Alliance. After all, the new administration of the White House has already made it clear Trump's much more interesting are the affairs of the Indo-Pacific region. There, the President of the United States is preparing for war with China. So far, only economic.
Everyone understands that if the United States were to withdraw from NATO, this alliance would cease to exist. Actually, it's hard for us to say. In general, it is difficult to rationally comment on steps and statements that come from Washington, from the current administration.
He doesn't benefit from a united Europe in its current form. It's much more convenient for him to negotiate each time with each specific country, more precisely with the leader of that state, who would be quite good if he were a national patriot and an isolationist. And even better if he is someone you supported during his election campaign. Well, in other words, it's more beneficial for Trump to deal with a fragmented, divided Europe, or rather with its local leaders. Call them whatever you like, leaders, or maybe even little princes somewhere. I'm not talking about the Principality of Monaco right now. I'm referring to the principle of feudal principalities.
The first such feudal principality for Trump could be Hungary, specifically with the sly and unscrupulous Viktor Orban. It seems that it's easiest for Trump to negotiate. As a result, the White House, according to several journalists, is already considering the possibility of redistributing American troops in Europe these days. In fact, Trump is scaring the West, specifically in this case Germany, by threatening to move the troops stationed in the country to Hungary, leaving the Bundestag without the support of US troops.
This is a question, once again, of just economic benefit. So, of course, today's Europe irritates Trump a lot, and they won't miss the chance to break it apart.
However, it's unlikely that Trump and his administration will be able to easily break apart Europe, as some Western tabloids suggest. Like, for example, to simultaneously withdraw US troops from Germany? Military experts are already explaining. Specifically, we're talking about at least 35,000 people. And also the equipment, gear, and so on. It's not that easy to relocate so many troops from one country to another. And also, although the United States is supposedly planning to withdraw from participating in future NATO exercises, but they won't do it anytime soon. At least for the year 2025, this won't affect NATO exercises. For Trump, who loves to solve everything here and now and only ends up with wars, in 24 hours. That's not typical.
6 weeks ago, I stood under the dome of the Capitol and proclaimed the dawn of America's golden age. In 43 days, we've achieved more than most administrations do in 4 or 8 years. And we're just getting started.
So, most likely, the administration of the American president and the high-ranking officials whose words Western media rely on are greatly exaggerating, and no one will urgently relocate troops, clearly and demonstratively causing discord within the North Atlantic Alliance.
Europe under France's nuclear umbrella, Russia prepares for a new war, Poland announces conscription of all men for military service, race for security, will the EU have time to rearm to meet modern realities? Conducting military operations. You can find the answers to these questions next.
Warsaw is negotiating with Paris. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated about the possible use of France's nuclear potential to protect European allies. According to him, Russia is actively rearming and preparing for a full-scale military confrontation, not only with Ukraine, but also, I quote, with someone much bigger. The head of the Polish government believes that in the current situation, Europe could find itself on the brink of war in the coming years.
They also need to use it as a priority. We need to look more boldly into the future when it comes to weapon technologies, and we are seriously discussing with the French their idea of a nuclear umbrella over Europe. It's time for Poland, using its available resources and its own experience, as well as the experience from the battlefield, the Ukrainian experience, to take a bolder look at our capabilities regarding the most modern weapons. We are facing a very serious race. This is a race for security, not a race to war.
French President Emmanuel Macron proposed using the French nuclear arsenal for deterrence in Europe. In a televised address on March 5th, he stated that Russia poses a threat to the entire continent.
Walking around, you don't pay attention to nuclear aspect.
Our nuclear deterrent forces have been protecting us since 1964. They have always played a role in maintaining peace and security in Europe. I also decided to initiate a strategic discussion on the protection of the entire continent using our nuclear weapons. The decision will depend on the leaders and commanders of European countries.
According to experts, in 2023, France had 290 nuclear warheads. 50 of them are mounted on air-launched cruise missiles. They can be carried by French multi-role fourth-generation fighters, the Dassault Rafale. This is the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. In terms of the number of warheads, France is surpassed only by Russia, the USA, and China.
One way or another, the possible withdrawal of the USA from the European continent in terms of security would definitely, I would put this question first, whose nuclear umbrella will be over Europe? So it turns out that besides France, there aren't really any serious options because Britain is not a member of the European Union. In addition, part of the British nuclear warheads are on American delivery systems, so it's not an absolutely sovereign solution either. So France is the only viable option.
Warsaw is also considering the possibility of withdrawing from international conventions banning anti-personnel mines and cluster munitions. The Prime Minister of Poland stated that the country intends to use all available means to ensure its security, considering the threat from Russia. Poland also plans to increase the size of its armed forces. Currently, there are 200,000 soldiers in the Polish army. Together with the reservists, it should number up to 500,000 people, according to Donald Tusk. Therefore, Warsaw is working on a program for extensive military training for all men of conscription age. Poland allocates just under 5% of its GDP to defense, which is a record figure for NATO countries, the president stated. Andrzej Duda, in 2026 and possibly even in 2025, military spending will reach 5% of GDP. The country's Ministry of Defense reported,
Poland has quite a serious army. Poland has good armored forces. Poland has a good saturation of artillery and a system for training reservists. To some extent, Poland is a country that many Eastern European nations, members of the European Union, could look to as an example in terms of ensuring their own security, a responsible approach to armaments, besides everything, I think Warsaw understands that, in fact, a strong army is an additional resource for image and sovereignty within the EU.
Prime Minister Donald Tusk emphasized that Poland's security directly depends on Ukraine's future. If Kyiv maintains its sovereignty, independence, and pro-Western course, it will ensure greater security for all of Europe.
The US has disconnected the F-16 from the electronic warfare system. The cessation of intelligence data transfer has led to dire consequences. Valuable equipment has turned into scrap metal. You'll find out the details in just a couple of seconds.
They were awaited for several years, but Trump managed to turn this high-tech equipment into very expensive scrap metal. Those very F-16s that Ukraine received from the US with incredible effort could become completely helpless in the coming days. On the battlefield,
the point is that the Trump administration, having decided to stop military support for Ukraine, also decided to halt the update of jamming equipment for American fighters. In simpler terms, F-16s emit a special signal during flight that makes them hard to detect on Russian radars, creating a blurry spot without clear coordinates. After that, the Russians reprogrammed their radars to new frequencies, but the F-16 equipment was also receiving constant updates from the United States, which will no longer be supplied due to Trump's decision.
Right now, we can't encrypt our F-16s. And over time, the Russians will be able to learn and see us in the sky. The pilots will be at risk, the same pilots that Biden said needed to be trained for 3 years. Thanks to Biden for training them for 3 years just so they could fly for 2 months, and then Trump came and removed those decoders.
In the end, even if we set aside the ethical issue of significantly increasing danger for the pilots, American birds simply won't be able to carry out combat missions near the front line. The question of their use as air defense in the western part of Ukraine remains open. But even so, given what the F-16s are capable of, it would be like hammering nails with a microscope.
The F-16s that were fought for so long, that were so pompously handed over by the US, are now struggling. And they might just be sitting somewhere in Transcarpathia, and that's it, providing no benefit.
However, it's not all bad, aviation experts assure us. The alternative for official Kyiv remains, and its name is Mirage 2000. France, which has very recently started delivering its aircraft to us, could very well replace the currently less functional F-16s.
Ukraine needs to shift its focus to the Mirages, relying on French technology. And the counteraction will be French because the Americans might not provide new software, and it's clear that we won't be able to make it ourselves.
At the same time, analysts note that the Mirages have similar electronic camouflage systems. The Americans are not involved in their programming, and today's France clearly does not foresee the same betrayal of Ukrainian pilots. Even when transferring the Mirages to Ukraine, it was noted in Paris that the planes would be equipped with advanced electronic warfare systems, likely fully digital countermeasures Suite Mark III, which are significantly better than those installed on the F-16s and can potentially show nothing at all on Russian radars instead of just creating a blurry spot.
And here we have the topic of long-range detection. Long-range radar detection systems can identify such targets at distances of up to several thousand kilometers depending on the flight altitude. If we talk about Ukraine's use of these aircraft, then as a rule we are talking about flights at low or ultra-low altitudes, which in principle often makes it impossible to detect them.
Analysts also note that during the use of Mirages, if the US position doesn't change, it will technically be possible to retrofit the F-16s with similar systems already produced in Europe. So American fighters definitely won't become a dead weight.
The new sanctions package from the US will affect the energy sector. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has put forward a relevant initiative. What methods of pressure on Russia are the US using this time? Watch right now. The initiative to impose new sanctions was put forward by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. This week, the politician plans to submit the relevant bill. This time, the sanctions are expected to target Russia's banking and energy systems. If Russia does not agree to a ceasefire and peace negotiations with the administration, we must impose tough sanctions on it, Graham stated in an interview with Fox News. The senator also emphasized that the US must resume providing intelligence and military supplies to official Kyiv. That's all for today. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and catch other news in the next episode of Hotspot.